So now we're going to talk about leaving a non-food item, because there's going to be plenty of things that you want your dog to leave that aren't necessarily food. There are things that you just want your dog to leave. So I'm going to use a leash here. Good girl. So say you want your dog to leave your nice pair of slippers. The first step is to get a cheap pair of slippers to use for practice. So if your dog does accidentally tear them up, it's not the end of the world. What you can do then is put the item under your foot so it's stationary. If it's the item's too big or cumbersome, you can tie a rope around it and stand on the rope. And then when the dog goes for it, you just give your leave it cue. Can you leave it? You click and treat. Leave it. Leave it. Good. And once the dog is leaving the item, when it's stationary under your foot, you can pick it up, leave it, leave it, good. Treats are falling all over the place here. Leave it. Good. Leave it. So the moment she pulls her nose away, I click and treat. Now, if the dog grabs onto the item, just hold your hand still. Don't do anything. Wait for them to release and move their nose away, and then click and treat. Leave it. And again, if you say leave it and the dog still has it in their mouth, is tugging on it, just hold. So pretend I'd set the cue. Just hold perfectly still, don't look at the dog, and wait for them to release the item and look away. Good job, Penny. Okay, so now what you do if your dog is fixated on, say, a dog across the street or something visual. That is a situation where you want the dog to look away from what you're telling them to leave. And I use leave it cue for that as well, for if the dog is visually distracted. So I'm going to try to demonstrate with this. I'm going to try to get her really interested in this. What's this, Penny? Leave it. Good. So here, leave it. Here, I do want her to look away from the item I'm telling her to leave. She doesn't have to look at me, but I do want her to look away from what I'm telling her to leave. Leave it. Leave it. Good. Leave it. Good. Leave it. Good. And again, here, if you tell your dog to leave it and they don't respond right away, you can use a target cue to that can help. Leave it. Touch. Good job. Very good, Penny. Very good. And So once you've done some work with the stationary object under your foot, you can have the object just laying on the floor. At this stage, I like having the dog on leash so they can't actually get to the object. But I do like having the leave it very solid at this point to reduce the likelihood that I will have to put, or that the dog will put any tension on the leash. So remember, your first cue is leave it. If the dog doesn't respond, your next cue is to touch or target. If the dog still doesn't respond, you can move your hand closer to them, ask them to touch again. And last resort, you can actually put a treat in front of their nose and lure them away, but that's always the last resort. Okay, so I'm just going to put this on the floor. Leave it. Leave it. Leave it. Leave it. Touch. Leave it. Touch. Leave it. Good. Now, what do you do if the dog if the dog gets the item? You tell them to leave it and they get the item. Hold the item. Tell them to leave it again. Again, don't move. Leave it. As soon as they pull their nose away, click and treat. And in a separate video, I'll talk about take it and give, which are related to leave it. That's take it and give is having the dog take something in their mouth and then giving it back to you on cue. Leave it is more about if the dog is interested in something or going for something, that they leave the item before they get it in their mouth. So those are some ways to work on the leave it cue using a non-food object. And after you go through and watch the video on having your dog leave a food item, then practice having your dog leave all kinds of things. Once your dog gets really good at leaving things, often one of the most challenging aspects is getting the dog to leave something that is moving or something that they see thrown. And so once your dog is really solid with leaving stationary items and stationary food on the floor, you can try have them leave an item that you throw. And when you do that, be sure to give the leave it cue before you throw the item. And also, I like to have the dog on leash when I first do this. The dog's prey drive is likely going to kick in, so there's a possibility that they will instinctively go after the item. And so that's why it's important that they first have a solid understanding of leave it from a stationary item before you add the motion, and then also to have them on leash when you do add motion, just in case they do go for the item. So the way you would do it would be like this. Leave it. Good. And if they don't go after the item, that's a success. You can click and treat that. Leave it. Good. Nice job. Leave it. Good. She was thinking about going after it, but she made the right decision. Good. Can you leave it? while to get to that step. That's one of the more advanced steps. But after that, the next step is moving the leash and having your dog do it without the safety net of the leash. Leave it. There she was fixating on the toy, so I was practicing having her visually leave something. Okay, so that is a pretty extended video about training Leave It, and I hope it gives you some good ideas. If you have any questions about any aspect of training Leave It, please email me, please email me. That's the best way to ask me questions, because in class we have only a limited amount of time, so I prefer questions to be asked between classes online, unless it's really something urgent that has to be discussed in class. But thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.